Oh, there you go. Thank you, Mark.
Basically, we get so wrapped up in our lives, so, schedules and things that we have to do, or to-do list and all of this. We've got so many things to do that we forget that we need God in our lives. So this is part of the reason that God said, I want you to pause every year for 1 week and just talk about who God is and how God works and what has happened in the past. So that was kind of the background to this whole feast and what was happening and what God was intending. And part of the reason that I wanted to do this is because I feel like in our age right now there is a spirit of oppression. What do I mean by that? People are feeling oppressed. I mentioned this last night, all these athletes that are protesting. Why are they protesting? Because we are disadvantaged. Now, every one of those athletes is making more than $1 million a year. How's that? You want to ask them, interview them. How are you disadvantaged? How are you oppressed? You're living in the freest country in the world. You are given all of these opportunities. Why do you feel oppressed? Now, they're going to come up with reasons. Yes. And I want to say this. It's easy to come up with reasons to feel oppressed. Yes. That guy cut me off on the highway. I'm oppressed. I need to blame somebody. I'm going to blame Trump. Trump is the reason that I'm feeling so oppressed. Why do I say that? Because it's a spirit that's come over our nation, and it's this generation that feels oppressed. And I want to talk about that because God told the Jewish nation, I want you to take out a week. Out of all of your busyness, out of all of your stuff that you have to do, take out a week and tell stories about how glorious God is. All of the wonderful interventions of God. Talk about them. And they would sing songs and they would dance and they had this was a camp out for a week. And I think it was a wonderful time where all the people were just so excited about God. I want to talk about this because I feel like this, whatever you call it, this spirit of oppression, people feeling like they have missed out. They've been missing out on something. We had the Wall Street protest. What was that about? Well, those guys on Wall Street, they're getting rich and we're getting poorer. Am I getting poorer? No. Do I have more opportunities than I've ever had in my life? So how am I oppressed? But I feel oppressed. Where is that coming from? That's why I call it a spirit of oppression, because it's coming over me. It has nothing to do with the truth, but I feel oppressed. Things bad are happening to me. It's got to be somebody's fault. So this is why I wanted to talk about this. You know those one percenters? They're getting richer and I'm getting poorer. So I'm upset at the one percenters. I want for you to know that's a spirit of oppression. And we have to guard ourselves against this spirit of oppression. We don't want to fall into the pattern. Most of you that come here often, I talk about the fact that I'm a recovering Pharisee. I want for you to know the spirit of Phariseeism. The spirit of Phariseeism is legal.
Yes.
It's how many things I'm not doing right, I have done wrong in the past. It's how many things I can't possibly keep up with. God has such a high standard, there's no way for me to really feel good about myself. So what does Pharisee do? He makes other people feel not so good about themselves. He wants for them to feel inferior. How many of you remember the story of the Pharisees brought the woman caught in adultery to Jesus? And you remember it was supposed to be a trap. Why did they feel like it would be a trap? Because they knew Jesus' history. He forgave everybody. Oh my goodness. He was so merciful. So they knew that if they brought this lady caught in adultery, they were going to be able to pin him to the wall, because they were going to say, you don't follow Moses. Moses said we're supposed to stone this lady, and what do you say? So they knew they had him in a trap. Why? Because they knew how he acted, what he did. They knew his whole, what do you call it, modus operandi. They knew how he would react. He would forgive her. And then they could say, you do not follow Moses. You're not a good Jew. That's what they wanted to do. How many of you get the feeling when you read that story that these guys were excited? These guys were excited about killing this lady, stoning her to death. This was going to be a fun day. We're going to kill this lady. And Jesus came across in a totally different spirit. Why did he have such a different spirit than the Pharisees? You know, he had the spirit of heaven. And I just want for us to get this. Part of the reason that God wanted the Jewish nation to pause for a week and get reacquainted with their God was because it's easy for us to start putting people down, judging people, saying that they're inferior. They haven't lived up to the standards of God. Now, probably none of you, but anyway, you know those other people out there. How many of you understand that the church is generally pictured, the church in our age is generally pictured as being very critical of the lifestyle of the people around us. Those people are liars, they're cheaters, they're greedy, all those people out there. But of course, we're not that way. Okay? So what's going on? It's that spirit of oppression. The Pharisees were oppressed, and what do? They make other people feel oppressed. Right? Now the reason I'm talking about this whole thing is because it's easy for us to fall into the pattern of making people oppressed. But that wasn't Jesus' style. Jesus was different. And we're going to see a couple things here in a couple of minutes here. Let's look at Luke chapter 7. If you've got your Bibles or your telephones or whatever, look at chapter 7 of Luke. Now, I wish I had time to read this whole story. But I do recommend you read it. Luke 7, and it really starts with verse 36. Jesus was invited to a Pharisee's house for lunch. And most of you know the story. When he got there, there was this lady that found out that he was there, and she didn't have a good reputation. But when she found out that Jesus was there, she came and worshiped Jesus. Now, remember, this is a Pharisee's house. So how does the Pharisee feel? How do the people at his house, his friends, feel? Who let that lady in here? And now Jesus is accepting her worship just like he didn't know who she was or what she has done. And so this is awful. And so they were all upset. And Jesus, I want for us to really take a look at what Jesus said. Let's see if I can find it real quick. Let's start with verse 46 because I want to include this other little tidbit here. Verse 46. You did not put oil on my head. Oh, no, wait. You did not give me a kiss. This is verse 45. But this woman, from the time I entered, has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, for she loved much. And then he makes a statement. He who has been forgiven little loves little. Why is it important for us to spend time, a pause, to get to know our God? To get to know what heaven's customs are, because they're so different from earth. And for whatever reason, it's easy for us to become religious. I don't know why. I guess because we have a congregation and that, it just looks religious. But we need to understand that it is not religious. What God is trying to do is impart some of heaven into our spirits. What is it like in heaven? I want you to think about that. There are no protests in heaven. Do you get that? Yes. There's no complaining in heaven. There's nobody feeling like, well, if those other people got such a blessing, then I should get a bigger blessing. Because I'm for sure better than they are. I prayed more, I gave more, I did more, whatever. That's not the spirit of heaven. The spirit of heaven, God is looking for people to bless. And that's what everybody in heaven wants to do. How many of you are looking forward to going to heaven so you can get blessed? There's going to be lots of passing around of blessings in heaven, but what we're supposed to understand is the spirit of heaven is giving, serving, helping. Right? You understand that? How do we get that? By allowing God to do that for us. If I am all the time being given to by God, if I'm all the time being taken care of by God, I find God to be the kindest, most loving person that I've ever been associated with. What happens to me? I become the same way, right?
Yes.
You get that? This is what Jesus was saying to the Pharisee when this woman was blessing him. He said, you know what? You didn't even do the normal courtesy things when I came into your house. You neglected all the courtesy things. You didn't wash my feet. You didn't anoint me. You didn't make me feel welcome. And then he says something powerful. He says, this woman has done this. Why? Because she's been so forgiven. Wow! What happens when you are forgiven? Some of you remember when you first came to Christ and He forgave you. Some of you remember last week when you weren't living up to the standards of God and He forgave you. Right? Do you remember? It's important for us to keep track. And this is what He says. And then He tells this whole story. I wish I had time to tell this whole story, but He tells the story about the two guys. One that owed a lot of money and one that owed a little bit of money. And He says the guy that owed a lot of money was forgiven. He was forgiven for millions of dollars worth of debt. But he finds a guy who owes him a couple $100, and he goes and gets him arrested, gets him beaten. Why? Because he says, he owes me money. Do you understand that when we live in an oppressive culture, it's easy for us to become oppressive. But what if we live in a forgiving culture where everybody forgives and everybody blesses and everybody helps and everybody, is on your side? What happens? You become the same way. And Jesus said this really powerful thing. He who has been forgiven little loves little. I want for us to catch this, because we have this tendency. This is a part of our nature, our human nature, is that we like to think good about ourselves. And so we don't make a big thing out of our failures, our sins. We try to minimize them. In fact, we've even got words, we've got ways of saying it so that people don't feel guilty. Now, I feel like you are not living up to your standard or God's standard. What am I looking at? I want to say this. If we don't take time to know God, to really know Him, what do? We start thinking judgmentally. When it says, he who has been forgiven little, what is that saying? It's not saying that some of us are a lot less guilty than others, and so we've only been forgiven a little. Jesus, it was interesting when He said, the doctor comes for those who have failed, those who are really sick, those who have sinned. But those who haven't sinned, they don't need a doctor. And He says this to the Pharisees. Why does He say it to the Pharisees? They feel like they hadn't sinned. They had done everything right, up to the line. Is that what Jesus was saying to them? Jesus was not saying, you've sinned less. He's saying, you're not keeping a good accounting of what you have done or where you have failed. Right? You understand? Jesus was not trying to minimize what they owed. And this is what He's saying here. Oh my goodness. I want to talk about Jonah real quick. Jonah was a prophet, right? Oh, and we know prophets are holy, right? But you read that book of Jonah, and you find all of the conflicts between God and Jonah. Jonah did not want to preach to the Ninevites. Why? He said, well, they deserve punishment. They have been wicked. They have been terrible. Their offenses are great. So they should be punished. And God said, that's not my feeling. We need to understand, how does heaven feel about our failures? How does God feel about our failures? He had to correct Jonah because Jonah was a preacher. Oh, can't have this preacher railing on people, putting them down, making them feel inferior, making them feel awful about who they are. That wouldn't work because it's not the spirit of heaven. So God had to correct Jonah and say, wait a minute, the way you feel. And if you read through the book, I would love to just go through it with you and show you all the places where God and Jonah are in conflict. And God says to Jonah, is it right for you to oppose me? Jonah says, yes, it's right for me to oppose you. I know there's lots of people, if you hear them, they say, well, God's got to answer. He can't get away with some of the stuff that he's been doing. God's got to answer. As if I can hold God accountable. I want for you to know there is not going to be anybody in heaven who opposes God. You're going to be there 30 seconds and you're going to know that he is an absolute ruler. He is always absolutely right. And you have nothing to say to God. Oh my goodness. I just want to say, don't let this spirit of oppression cause you to be in opposition to God. I don't have time to do this, but I want for you to understand. There's a story about the 10 lepers that came to Jesus. They had leprosy. And they asked him if he could do something to help them. Now, I don't know what they were expecting. I don't know if they were expecting a handout, if they were expecting him to somehow give them freedom that Moses had restricted them from. I don't know what they are expecting. But they came to Jesus and said, we need help. Jesus, he didn't touch them or anything. All he said was, go to the priest and get your clean bill of health. I wish I had time. Let me just say this. It's interesting to me that God put that in Leviticus, that if people got cured of leprosy, they had a way of getting a clean bill of health. He told the priests exactly what to look for, exactly what to not allow, what to allow. It was clear. God made a provision for healing. But the story, goes that the 10, on their way to the priest, were healed. By the time they got there to the priest, they didn't have leprosy anymore. Now, there's something I would like to just very briefly mention. It says one of those lepers was a Samaritan. Well, that's interesting. Samaritans and Jews didn't get along with each other. They They didn't join clubs together. They were not friends. But when they came to Jesus, a group of 10 lepers, they were brothers. Do you understand? They were brothers in their misery, in their crisis. How many of you understand? Crises bring about unity. But here's what's interesting. When they were healed, when they were well, when God gave them cure for leprosy, only one of them came back. And guess which one it was? It was the Samaritan. Now this is interesting. I don't know. I mean, there's no way for me to read between the lines here to know. But I wonder if in our blessing, it's harder for us to come into unity than it is in our crises when we need God. Well, let me just, I need to close this, and there's still a lot more I would like to say. But let me just say this. How many of you are thrilled with your relationship with God?
Yes.
Do the people around you know that you are thrilled? Are you excited?
Amen.
Some of you are. I always think about this. If we have paused to realize who our God is, it's exciting. There's a couple pictures of heaven, and it has everybody in heaven rejoicing, dancing, singing, praising God, having the most awesome time they've ever had. How come? Because they've been in the presence of God. I want to say, if you get to be in the presence of God, it's going to make you excited. You're going to be thrilled. You're going to find it hard to contain yourself because you have experienced God.
Yes.
And I want to say this. Maybe the reason that you aren't excited is because you haven't been experiencing God. Now, you can. It's available.
Yes.
But some of you aren't experiencing God. Why? Maybe you haven't taken the time. You haven't paused for those few minutes. You haven't begun to talk to other people about how exciting God is. God has come through for you. I thought it was neat. Robin gets up and says, "Oh, we prayed, and God came through for my son and daughter-in-law." Whee! This week, several miracles. Ah, wonderful. Did you get excited about that? Is that thrilling to you? To know that God answers prayer that quick, that far away. God answers prayer. Now, I look around when we're worshiping. Maybe I'm not supposed to look around. I don't know. But I see some of you are excited about God. Oh my goodness, you can't praise Him loud enough or fully enough. You're intense in your worship of God. Well, what do I know? I know you've spent some time with Him. But then there's some of you, it's almost like it's a chore. Do I have to raise my hands? No, you don't have to raise your hands. Do you have to dance? No, you don't have to dance. Do you have to get excited about God? No, you don't have to get excited about God. It's not a requirement. It's not a Pharisee kind of thing. But if If you have a hard time keeping your feet on the ground, I know you've spent time with God. Okay, we're gonna close. I'm over my time. But I want to say to you, you can have an exciting life. You wouldn't be here this morning if you thought it was a chore. I got to get up. I got to take a shower. I got to get dressed. Oh my goodness. Oh. And all those people over there are all going to be smiling. And they're expecting me to smile. And if I don't smile, they're going to say, "Can I pray for you?" I don't want to go to church. But most of you made it here because you're excited about Jesus. And I'm just saying, boy, you could have the overflowing life. Why did God do this thing saying, take 1 week out of the year and just spend it understanding me, knowing how I am, I know exactly where you are, and I know exactly what your problems are, and I have the exact solution that you need. Ooh-wee! That's pretty awesome. Okay, I gotta quit. I already said that once, right? Let's pray.